Morning, church. And morning to the other of you who are joining us via live stream. Glad to have you with us this morning. Sounds like we had a wonderful time at camp this week, a great camp. Barrett is going to give us a report right after the invitation this morning, kind of fill you in on what went on. When you get a chance, if you would shake that man's hand, hug him, pat him on the back, whatever you need to do to let him know how much you appreciate him. I don't think people really understand all that goes into making that camp happen. I mean, there's the logistics of finding the counselors that are necessary and the kitchen help and all that, but it goes way beyond that. He doesn't just lay out lesson plans, he writes those lesson plans himself, and that takes hours and hours and hours of work to get that done. And there's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into making a good camp, and we need to really thank Barrett and Lisa for the tremendous job that they do in coordinating that work. In fact, let's give them a hand. We've been talking about different doorways that the devil has that we need to be very aware of, okay? And we've talked about anger, and we've talked about covetousness. And what I mean by a devil's doorway is this. There are certain sins that if you get involved in them, don't just stop with that sin. They automatically open the door to other sins. As we talked about last week, for instance, with covetousness, if you open that door to coveting what somebody else has, as we saw from Scripture, you open the door to ugly things like in the case of David, murder and betrayal and adultery. In the case of Jezebel and Ahab, bearing false witness, cold-bloodedly executing an innocent man to get a piece of dirt, and that's all. I mean, covetousness leads to all kinds of ugly, ugly things. But one of the real challenges, I think, with a number of doorways that the devil has is that the attitudes are a kind of two-edged sword. We talked about anger. And the fact that anger can be a really good thing. It can be. It can motivate us to stand up against evil and make a real difference in this world. It can also be something that absolutely destroys our life and the lives of others. Jealousy is very much that way. And we'll probably spend some time talking about jealousy. But that green-eyed monster, there's a part of jealousy that's a very good thing. God will say, for instance, Exodus 34:14, "My name is jealous. I'm a jealous God." He loves his people. He wants his people to be faithful to him. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But as we often refer to jealousy as that green-eyed monster, I've watched jealousy destroy relationships and ruin lives. It can be a very ugly thing that opens all kinds of bad doors. And so it is with pride. Pride's a two-edged sword. Hey, you know, if a mechanic is working on my car, I want him to take pride in changing my brakes. I want him to do a good job, don't you? If a surgeon is operating on me, I want a man or a woman who takes great pride in their work when they go to work on me. I'm blessed with neighbors on either side of me that really take pride in their yards. Makes everybody's house look better if the neighbors take good care of their yards. I appreciate that. At the same time, as we're going to see, pride, man, can be a really ugly thing. It can open the door to some things that we just don't need in our lives. And so this morning I want us to look at what the Scripture warns us in regard to pride. Solomon will write in Proverbs 16:18, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." And I want you to hear that word haughty because it's going to show up three times in these initial passages. There are 6 things that the Lord hates. 7 that are an abomination to him. Interestingly, what's number 1? Haughty eyes. Pride. Pride. Right off the bat, that's what Solomon cites. you go to an interesting passage in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 16, verses 49 and 50. And I want you to listen to what God says here as he talks about Sodom. And I know what we generally think of as the sin of Sodom, but listen to what God says the sin of Sodom was. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had what? Pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were, there's that word again, haughty, prideful, and did an abomination before me. There comes in the sexual sin. But it's not mentioned until it's in the context of their prideful attitude, their haughty eyes. So I removed them when I saw it. You see, what pride did, and we're going to look at this more thoroughly, is open the door for human beings to stand in rebellion against God and say, you know, I really don't care what you want. I don't care what you say. I don't care the lines you draw. I'm going to do what I want to do. Nobody is going to tell me what to do. That's exactly what happened in the case of Sodom. And look at the mess that they created. Now, pride opens the door to some really ugly things. It opens the door, for instance, to arrogance. Jesus, Matthew 23, verses 5 and 7, here he's really tying into the Pharisees and the scribes. One of the scariest passages to me in all of Scripture, because he really gets after them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. And they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and being called rabbi by others. In other words, what? They are all caught up in being respected, okay, and being treated in a very special way, in a sense being revered. But listen to him. Why are they doing the stuff they're doing? They're doing it to be seen by others. They're doing it to stoke their pride. They're doing it so others will pay attention to them and say, hey, did you see who I just saw sitting over there? Why, that's Rabbi so-and-so. Woo-hoo. I was doing some research several years ago. I was writing a paper, and I opened up a book, and it was written by the Holy Reverend Dr. Father, and then there was the guy's name. I've never forgotten that. In fact, I memorized that series of appellations. This man wasn't satisfied to just be Reverend or Father or Doctor. He had to be Reverend Dr. Father, but that wasn't good enough. He had to stick Holy in front of it. Holy Reverend Dr. Father. And oh, by the way, I didn't think much of the book. You know, the thing about it is, we can get all hung up on titles, all hung up on positions. And so often, when people do that, in reality, you're dealing with folks who really have feelings of inferiority. Because they have feelings of inferiority, they're trying to force others to give them recognition. And so well, you will address me as blah, blah. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. You see, pride brings on this arrogance. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3. Remember how Jesus begins the Beatitudes? Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are whom? The poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the truly, truly humble. I had a good friend, one of my elders, while I was preaching at Sunset, who was Dr. And when I first met him, he made it real clear to me. He said, Dan, I'm John. I'm not Doctor. And I just want you to know me as John. And that was his attitude toward everybody. You know, yes, he was Dr. So-and-so, but he was John. And he was a servant, and he had a servant's heart. And that's exactly what he's talking about here. Pride, what does pride do? I guarantee you what pride does is causes you to say, well, you need to serve me. And is that to be our attitude? Someone is prideful. They're looking for somebody else to open the door for them, somebody else to pull out the chair for them, somebody else to position them here, position them there. That's what pride's all about. A servant's heart is going to be opening the door for others, pulling the chair out for others, serving others in various ways. I think I've told you before, when I had the DVT in my leg and they put me in the hospital and pumped all these drugs into me and I was sicker than a dog. Dudley Cash, one of my elders, came in to visit, and Dudley walked over to my bed just as I, perfect timing, threw up all over myself. And I was so embarrassed, man. But I was sick. And Dudley, I'll never forget this. Dudley did not go, he didn't ring the buzzer and call the nurse and flee the room. And I wouldn't have blamed him if he had, but that's not what he did. That man walked over to the sink, and he got a washcloth and a towel, and he came over and he cleaned me up. And that tells you all you need to know about Dudley Cash and the kind of man that Dudley was and is. Better not speak of him in the past tense because he's still alive. But I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. That's what Christ's heart is all about. It's not about being served. It's about serving others. Secondly, pride opens the door to another very ugly thing, and that's to deceit and lying. In 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 26 through 28, we read about how after Rehoboam comes to the throne, and remember, it's under him that the kingdom's torn in half. Shishak, king of Egypt, attacks Israel, and he successfully takes Jerusalem. And we're told Shishak sacks the temple, and he also sacks the royal palace. From the royal palace, I would assume, he takes all the gold shields that Solomon had made. Now remember, Solomon had, hard to imagine the wealth that man had. But clearly he had so much that he had gold made into shields, and periodically, apparently at public festivals and things, he would have these shields brought out just to show off the wealth of Israel and of Solomon. Well, Shishak takes all those back to Egypt. Rehoboam has brass shields made, copies. But they're not gold, they're brass. And if you polish up brass, it'll glisten in the sun too and look pretty. But it's not gold. And to me, there's no more powerful statement of the fall of a kingdom and the decline of a kingdom than the picture here of people now admiring brass shields because the gold ones have been taken away. And they want the pomp and the circumstance and all that, but it's really not there anymore. Not like it had been. Pride, leading to deceit. How about fish stories and crop reports? You know, the first guy to tell the biggest fish he ever caught doesn't have a chance, does he? Because somebody's going to follow and they will have caught a bigger fish every time. When I was preaching out in Portales, there was a farmer out there, and I will guarantee you nobody in the county ever had a higher production of whatever it was than he did. Didn't make any difference whether it was wheat or Milo or whatever it might be, peanuts. He always had the highest bushels per acre of anybody in the county, always. Whatever you raised, his was a couple of bushel better. And the fact was, and it was sad, that there were a lot of people in the county that just kind of laughed at him behind his back because they knew. They knew how he was. They knew how he exaggerated. And it was his pride was causing him to do so. He wanted to be the best farmer, and whether the truth had to be compromised or not. Peer pressure and hypocrisy. How many times, because we want to be popular, because we want to be well-liked, do we compromise our morals? Do we say things that otherwise we wouldn't say? Laugh at things that we shouldn't laugh at? Go along with things that we shouldn't go along with because we know better as Christians. But man, people won't think quite as much of me if I take this stand. And we end up allowing peer pressure to turn us into hypocrites. Pride opens the door to that. It opens the door to self-righteousness. The parable of the Pharisee and the publican, found in Luke 18, verses 9 through 14. I just want to read that to you because here I think you find as punchy a description of how God looks at pride and self-righteousness as you're going to find anywhere in Scripture. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. Two men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus: God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Is God impressed with our righteousness? He's not, is he? And this Pharisee bragging to God about what a great guy he is, obviously is not producing the impact on God that he thinks he is. Because Jesus speaks in such denigrating terms of that kind of attitude, this self-righteousness. Matthew 7, verses 1 through 4, remember what it warns? Don't judge, lest you be judged. For with the judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you meet, it'll be measured to you. It is real easy, isn't it, to stand and judge others, or sit and judge others, jump to quick conclusions about things. Last week I was talking about how Carol has to calm me down sometimes in driving situations, okay? One of the things that has helped me a lot in settling myself down is just being honest with myself about myself as far as how I drive. More than once, man, I've changed lanes and I heard the horn honk and somebody slam on their brakes to avoid hitting me. And I'm sure they were thinking, what an idiot, not paying attention. Why that? And I just flat goofed. Wasn't intended to crowd anybody or hurt anybody, but do you ever do that? Man, I'm so glad now we got those little yellow blinking lights in the rearview mirrors on either side, that tell you a car's coming up on your blind side and kind of warn you about that. I'm thankful for those things because it's real easy to get distracted, and before you know it, you nearly cause somebody else to wreck, and that's not your attitude, that's not your desire, that's not what you want to do. Anyway, now I think about that and I go, how do I know that's not exactly what was going on with them? Same thing. And I wouldn't want somebody to be mad at me because I just was just not thinking for a second. Why should I get all over them when I'm the same way? And in so many cases, well, he lied to me. Yeah, you never lied to anybody, right? Well, boy, he lost his temper and said some things he shouldn't have said. Like you never did that. I mean, how often do we find ourselves condemning others for doing something that we've done as well? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! If you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence, you blind Pharisee. First, clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. Man, they're all hung up on making sure that every cup and every bowl and every utensil is cleansed so that it's not unclean when they use it. Okay, man, that really impresses some people. But here's the thing. When you run into somebody who's really self-righteous and they're just... How often does that make you feel kind of inferior? Well, look at them, man. They never have any problem in their marriage. They never had any problem with their kids. He never has any problem on the job like I do. Wow, what's wrong with me? Because I've got problems in all those areas. And the reality is that if he were honest, he's got problems in all those areas too. He just doesn't want to admit them. That's one of the problems I've got a lot of times with Facebook. Look at my perfect life. Yeah, right. And we know better. But that's the kind of thing that gets put out there all the time. The fact of the matter is that we need to be encouragers, not discouragers. We walk around with our nose stuck up in the air. Well, I'm not going to have anything to do with you, man, because you're just, wow. How are we going to influence that person and move them toward the Lord? When all we can do, when we're too busy making ourselves feel better because, Lord, at least remember the Pharisee. Well, I'm not like him. That's what pride leads to. Pride opens the door to some ugly things. And finally, pride opens the door to self-will. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind, to sow what ought not to be done. They are insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents. People nod their tongues in anguish and curse the God of heaven for their pain and sores. They did not repent of their deeds. Revelation 16, verses 10 and 11. What got Adam and Eve in trouble in the garden? Wasn't it self-will? Yeah, I know what God said. He said, don't eat of the fruit of that tree. But man, that fruit looks good. Things going to taste good. Promises to make me wise. Going to make me like him. I'm going to eat that fruit. How many problems do we face in this country today? How many challenges do we have out there? Because people are convicted. Nobody is going to tell me what to do. Nobody is going to tell me how to live. I'm going to go about things in my way. And the consequence of that is the mess that we see today. The incredible confusion that exists in our culture, the ongoing conflicts that are going on because everybody's decided it's all about me, right? It's all about me. And forget others. That's self-will. And that's pride. That's nobody's going to tell me what to do. That's exactly what led to the decline of Israel. That's what led to the decline of Rome. And if this country doesn't turn it around, that's what's going to lead to the fall of this country as well. Any country that turns away from God and turns toward self-will is going to find itself moving inevitably toward its own self-destruction. Pride. You step through this door at your own risk. You do. You need to understand that when you step through this door, you open the door to arrogance, you open the door to deceit, you open the door to self-righteousness, you open the door to self-will, you open the door to some other ugly things as well we don't have time to go into. But the bottom line is, do you really want to step through that door? Do you need to step through that door? One of the things about becoming a Christian, one of the things that I'm really touched by and admire about those young people who were baptized this week was when you become a Christian, there's some stuff that you have to do, and one of them is you got to swallow your pride. You thought about that? That's why God hates haughty eyes, because you got to swallow your pride. You've got to admit, I'm a sinner. You've got to admit, I can't fix this myself. You've got to admit, I need divine help. You've got to humble yourself. You've got to acknowledge I need to change things in my life. I need to change how I think. I need to change how I act. That takes courage. And I don't care if you're 13 or 113. It takes courage to make those acknowledgments. Courage to do that. In this day and age, courage to say, yeah, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And yeah, I'm going to take the physical step of being baptized into Christ because I want to be God's child. A lot of pride is swallowed in the process of that, but an incredible door is opened in the process of that. A door to heaven is opened when we give ourselves to Him. And this morning, if you're ready to show that courage and take those steps, God's ready to accept you with open arms. If you're ready to come to Him, won't you do so while we stand and while we sing? Clock says it's time to begin. So I appreciate the visitation and all, but we need to get class underway. I invite you to open your Bibles to the book of Proverbs, chapter 19, as we continue to survey a number of what I would call gems out of the book. Again, I would encourage you to read Proverbs on a regular basis, and you're going to find passages, I'm sure, that just jump out at you, that just share truth, that just really hits home with you. And that's what I did, was just read through, and then when a passage really struck me, underline it and go, yeah, this is one that we need to talk about. Again, kind of like mining for opals. And I want us to begin this morning in chapter 19, verse 11. This again is English Standard Version. Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is its glory to overlook an offense. I think more and more we live in a day and age where people are encouraged to look for reasons to be upset, to look for things that anger them or hurt their feelings in some way. And that is a really awkward way to go through life. It's really an awkward way to try to run a culture. In fact, I would argue a culture is going to falter when there's that kind of attitude that seems to be permeating. We hear talk today about microaggressions. I don't know if you're familiar with the term or not, which simply makes reference to little things that happen, but those little things are seen as big things by the one that it's happening to. I had the experience, it's been a while back now, but I had the experience of opening the door for a lady going into a department store, and she informed me that she could open the door herself. She didn't need any help. Obviously, I offended her by opening the door for her. I certainly didn't intend to. That was not my plan at all. But more and more people, I think, seek out opportunities to be offended. You walked right by me in the grocery store and you didn't even wave. I baked a pie and took it over to her house, and you know what? I never even got a thank you. And people will look for reasons to be offended, reasons they believe to be angry. And I just want you to think about how that taints life when you do that. And we've talked about this before, and I just really believe this. Listen, man, we are all human beings, and we all say and do stupid things. We do. I mean, just because we're human, we do. And we really do owe it to each other to cut each other slack when it comes to those things. There's a ton of stuff that happens that by no means rises to the level of needing to be forgiven. It just needs to be blown off and forgotten, and you just go your way and let that be that. And I absolutely believe that what Solomon says here is totally true. Good sense makes one slow to anger, because as we've talked about, anger can open all kinds of doors that you don't need to open. Cause you to say things and do things that you don't need to do and you don't need to say. And if we're aware of the dangers that are associated with anger, and again, I'm not saying there aren't things that should make us angry, because there are things that should make you angry. But when we get angry and the heart starts pumping and the adrenaline starts flowing and all those things start working that work, when that happens, it is real easy to step over a line we don't need to step over and say and do things that we'll be ashamed of later. And so I really do believe that it makes good sense to really be slow to anger. And it is glory to overlook a whole lot of what happens to us. And not saying you blow off major sin or anything like that. I'm just saying in their daily interactions with people that there's a lot of stuff that we just need to let go. And we don't need to dwell on, and we don't need to drag around with us, because it's totally counterproductive. And I really do think so much of anger is a matter of perspective. And being wounded and hurt and upset is a matter so often of perspective. And we need to have the right kind of perspective. To verse 13. A foolish son is ruin to his father, and a wife's quarreling is a continual dripping of rain. I heard some amens. I didn't hear. The fact of the matter is that what he's touching on here is really, really significant, really important. And I think that's why he'll hit it again and again. This is the only place where he's going to make statements like this. And underlying all this, I believe, is the idea that relationships really matter. They matter a lot. Because those relationships have huge impact on us emotionally, have huge impact on every aspect of our lives, and we need as much as possible to ensure that those relationships we have, particularly those close relationships, are healthy. Now, this first statement, a foolish son is ruin to his father. Man, how many daddies have had their hearts broken by their sons? And how many of those men, when they were sons, broke their daddy's heart? I mean, it's kind of built in us, isn't it, at times, to just disappoint and to foul up. I mean, I wish I could say that I never broke my daddy's heart, but I'd be lying if I did. We all make mistakes. We all do stupid things. And we need to appreciate the impact that that has on those we love. A foolish son is ruin to his father. Because if you love your kids and your kids mess up, that hurts, and it hurts deeply, and it really affects everything. When I was preaching in Portales, there was a member of the congregation there, who had the most successful insurance company in town by far. Worked hard, did an excellent job, and had a tremendous business. His son really wasn't interested in participating in the business, really didn't want any part of it. And so he brought on a young man, and he mentored him and worked with him. And that young man did very well in that business. He was also a member of the congregation. That went on for several years, and then the son decided that he wanted in on the business, that he wanted to be a part of the business. And the father, with a lot of angst and heartache, divided the business, or basically let go this young man that he had mentored and worked with for a long time, and brought his son on board. The young man that he let go started his own insurance business. Knew the business, knew how to work hard, and from the very beginning did quite well. The son, in a few years, took over his dad's business, and in about 5 years ruined it. Just ruined it. Because he wanted the money, but he didn't want the work. Didn't want the responsibility. And of course, didn't service clients like he should. And all those clients ended up going over to the young man who had worked with his dad previously. And his business just grew and grew and grew. And I've never forgotten that, because I ached for this fellow who had invested his life in building this business and done so very well, built a very successful business, only to see his son run it in the ground in a relatively short time. A foolish son is ruin to his father. And a wife's quarreling is a continual dripping of rain. I was reading a really wise man who was talking about marriage, and he made an observation about marriage that I hadn't really thought about before, but it made a lot of sense. And he was talking about the fact, listen, if we're committed to our marriage, depending on how old you are when you get married, you're going to spend 50, 60, 70 years with this person. Wouldn't it be nice if you got along? Seriously, wouldn't it be nice if you got along? Through the years, I've watched a number of couples who have been married together for a long time, and they have lived in disharmony that whole time. And they're disgruntled and unhappy and continually griping and complaining about their mate, but they're not willing to fix it. And what this guy was saying as he was writing and making this point was, why in the world would you tie yourself into a relationship and not invest everything you could to make that relationship healthy? Because short of your relationship with the Lord, there's no more important relationship on the face of the earth than that one. And he gave us an example, this couple that he knew. And he liked bacon and eggs for breakfast, and she liked cereal. And she didn't want to cook him bacon and eggs for breakfast because she didn't like bacon and bacon and eggs have high cholesterol and all that. And so she would fix cereal, and he'd sit there and gripe. He wouldn't fix his own bacon and eggs. He said they were in counseling for a number of reasons, and this came up, but he said it was just an example of the problem that existed in their relationship, which was, he said, I want you to think about it. Every morning you get up, and the first half hour, she's mad at him and he's mad at her. over a stupid breakfast. That's 30 minutes a day, 365 days a year. Start doing the math. You're talking 180 some odd hours a year where you're bent out of shape over something stupid. Take that times 50 years, and you're talking about thousands of hours of misery. And he said, I just told him, you need to sit down and you need to talk this out. Oh, we just can't say eye to eye. No, I said you need to talk it out. Is it worth it to work it out? Work it out. You're intelligent adults. You're mature. Come on. It's cereal and bacon and eggs. Work it out. And they did. There are so many things about the precious relationship that is marriage that we ought to savor and enjoy and appreciate. And one of the things about that special relationship is that it needs constant maintenance. It needs constant work. It needs constant updating. It needs constant attention to keep it running and working well and functioning like you want it to function and like it should function. And that being the case, why wouldn't you spend the time necessary to make that relationship just as solid and happy and good and wholesome as it could possibly be? Because what have you got to lose? Nothing. And you've got everything to gain. And don't make the mistake of, well, that's going to be kind of touchy and difficult. Okay, do you want it to be touchy and difficult for an hour or two? Or do you want it to be touchy and difficult for 25 years? Just deal with it and work through it. And get on with life, and you've got that behind you. And as to mature, particularly Christian adults, that ought to be the way it is. I've got a man I love dearly, and he's been in a miserable relationship for a long time, and it remains miserable. And he's got a miserable life. I thank God that every morning I get up and I'm glad to see that woman. And I'm glad to be with her and glad to talk to her and glad to be around her, and I don't have to dread that, and I am so thankful for that. Y'all better be thankful in the same way for your mates. Because what a blessing that is, because not everybody has that blessing. But it ain't accidental. It requires ongoing effort and ongoing work. But again, relationships matter. They do. They matter a lot. And those relationships that are nearest and dearest to us, those relationships with our children and with our mates and with our parents and things, are relationships that we really need to work on to make them as healthy as possible, because that will be a blessing in a multitude of ways. What he says here is absolutely something that all of us need to take to heart and live out in our lives. Down to chapter 20, verse 1. Wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it isn't wise. There are a lot of things in this world, and I talked about this at the first of the lesson this morning. They're double-edged swords. There's a good side and there's a bad side. You know, after I had my two major surgeries, man, was I thankful for opioids. Because when you hurt like that and there's something that will assuage the pain, thank God for it. Okay? Now, can that be abused? Oh, yeah. Can you become addicted, and can that become something very ugly? Yes, it can. Is there a positive side and a negative side to that? Yes, there absolutely is. And with so many things, it's the same way. There's a positive and there's a negative to it. And much of it has to do with, are you wise in your usage? Are you wise in your approach to it? And here, can wine be a mocker? Can strong drink be a brawler? Sure. I'm sure nearly every one of us at one time or another had to sit in a health class, right? And they talk to you about what alcohol does to you physiologically and how alcohol operates. The fact of the matter is that one of the first parts of the brain that alcohol operates on is right in the prefrontal lobe of the brain. And what it does is, one of the first things it does is inhibits your ability to inhibit yourself. It messes with your ability to reason. And that's a recipe for disaster, isn't it? If not for disaster, certainly a recipe for embarrassment. Because how many people do you know who have said and done things that they were incredibly embarrassed about later, but when they said them and when they did them, they were inebriated? Wine, strong drink, can be medicinal, they can be helpful, they can, in all kinds of ways, be a blessing. They can also misuse, destroy, just like all these other substances. And what Solomon is speaking of here, it's so important, is wisdom. It's wisdom in approaching these things. How many people are in prison right now because they got drunk and did something stupid? Alcohol is a causative factor in a lot of major crimes. A lot of major crimes. And it's the kind of thing that we need to be very aware. You know, what's interesting to me is, if you're a pilot, how high do you have to fly before you're required to put on oxygen? 12,000 feet. 12,000 feet, you're required to put on oxygen. Why? Because at that level, your brain becomes deprived of the oxygen that it needs to function, and you'll start doing things that you wouldn't do otherwise poorly. Okay? And you'll get yourself in trouble. And so they require you to wear oxygen. Now, if alcohol acts in a similar fashion in inhibiting our ability to function, should we pay attention to that? That to me is why DUIs and stuff like that are just, inexcusable as far as I'm concerned. There's no reason in the world for somebody to drive inebriated. None. Zero. No justification for it. It's dangerous and it's wrong. It's irresponsible. It shouldn't happen. Okay? Solomon, and what's interesting is this is 3,000 years ago. You'd think we'd have got that figured out by now, wouldn't you? And instead we have last figures I saw were roughly 15 million alcoholics in this country. I doubt if there's a single one of you sitting out there that doesn't know somebody who has a problem with alcohol or whose life has been impacted by alcohol. I've shared with you, I have 2 close relatives. Both died because of alcohol. And one was in his 40s and the other was in her 20s. And alcohol destroyed them. It can destroy you. Okay, it's nothing to mess with. A couple of other passages here in chapter 20. 20:11 really struck me. Even a child makes himself known by his acts, by whether his conduct is pure and upright. I want you to think about this for a second. Can a 22-year-old have a reputation as a terror Yeah, you don't want to mess with him. You don't want to be around him. This guy, woo, no. Can a 2-year-old have your reputation as a terror? They sure can, can't they? Okay. That 2-year-old, 4-year-old, I told you here a while back, I think I shared with you, Carol and I were eating at Colton's and having a quiet meal, enjoying just being with each other. And this little couple came in and they had, I assume he was probably about 3. Little tow-headed 3-year-old boy, cute as a bug. He was a monster. I kid thee not. They could not control it, would not control this kid. I mean, he was all over the table, he was all over the chairs, he was down on the floor. If they picked him up and tried to restrain him, he was screaming. What an enjoyable dining experience, right? You could see all these looks, people around just daggers. Take this kid out. Nobody's shouting it, but everybody's like, take this kid out, and they won't do it. Now, this 3-year-old is ruining mom and dad's dinner. You know they're miserable, man. Embarrassed, you could tell they were embarrassed. And bless their hearts, for whatever reason, they don't know what to do. Never been taught, never been shown, I don't know, but they don't know what to do. Everybody around there, their meal's been ruined. You know, you almost want to go and apply for a rebate or something, because wait a minute, I was supposed to come in here and enjoy my meal and I'm just getting frustrated. How old does somebody have to be before you start judging by their actions? Not very old. And those actions are a reflection of what's going on inside, isn't it? This little Beelzebub at 3, you knew what was going on inside his head. He ruled the roost, man. He ruled the house. He ruled mom and dad. He ruled it, no question. In his mind, it was going to be his way or the highway. You know, and nobody was going to get in his way, and nobody had. Unfortunately, up to this point, and I remember sitting there thinking, whew, what this kid going to be like at 13 if he's this way at 3. The fact is, we make ourselves known by our acts. We do. Not just by our words. In fact, I think far more by our acts than by our words. And he's saying that's true early on, and it is. You know, you've got children, man, they're 2 or 3, they're a joy to be around. They're a joy. You love keeping them, love playing with them, love having them around. They're just sweet kids. And then you've got the Beelzebubs. And you're like, Lord, deliver me. You know, because it is just a screaming, fighting match the whole time that you're dealing with them. Early on, you know by how a person acts what they're like. You do. And so, let me get one point real quick. Verse 14, because we're about out of time. I love this one too. Bad, says the buyer, but when he goes away, then he boasts. Now think about that for a second. What's he saying? Jerry David, that horse that you're trying to sell me, you're telling me that horse is 8, that horse has to be 12. And look, he's sway backed and he's kind of bent to one side, and you're wanting how much for that horse? And so then Jerry David comes down on the horse, and I buy the horse, and I walk away, and what do I say? I made a good buy, didn't I? Look here, I talked him down. Isn't that exactly what he's talking about here? It's exactly what he's talking about here. What are people going to do? Bad, says the buyer. But then, when he goes away, he boasts. In other words, do we have a tendency to try to manipulate other people? We do, don't we? And what he's saying here is just, to me, this is just a reflection of, really, of the interactions of human nature. You know, call it bargain hunting, call it whatever you want to, but bottom line, and I'm not, it's just the way it is. But I mean, yeah, you want how much for that thing? Well, but looky here, looky here, looky here, looky here. Man, I give you half that for it, but not a dime more. And you know it's probably worth 3 times that, but what are you doing? Well, you're talking it down. Then you walk away, hey, look at the buy I got. Here you go. Now, is that dishonest? Or is that hard bargaining? Well, you decide. Class is over. God bless.